I should have never taken that job. At 35 years old, I thought I had experienced enough in life to handle anything. I was a truck driver, used to long, lonely nights on the road, harsh conditions, and unexpected dangers. But nothing could have prepared me for what happened that night in the middle of a snowstorm in Montana. It was supposed to be a simple route: pick up a load of construction materials in Billings, drive through the mountains, and drop it off in Missoula by morning. The weather forecast had mentioned light snowfall, but nothing major. I had driven through snow plenty of times before, so I didn't think twice about it. I left the station around 9 p.m., and by 11 p.m., I was deep into the mountains. That's when the storm hit. The snowfall went from light flurries to a complete whiteout within minutes. My high beams barely penetrated the curtain of snow, and the winding mountain road became a death trap. Visibility was near zero, and my tires skidded on black ice more than once. I turned up the heater, but the truck's cabin remained freezing cold, colder than it should have been. I rubbed my hands together, trying to shake the uneasy feeling creeping up my spine. Then my radio crackled. At first, I thought it was just interference from the storm. But then, through the static, I heard a voice. "Turn back." I frowned and adjusted the frequency. "Hello? Who is this?" More static. "Turn back now." A shiver crawled up my spine. "Who the hell is this?" I snapped, but there was no answer. The storm howled around me, slamming against the truck like something alive. I couldn't turn back. I was in the middle of the mountains, and there were no safe places to pull over. Then I saw it. Headlights ahead. Dim, flickering, barely visible through the storm. Another truck? A car? I honked my horn twice, trying to signal them, but they didn't react. They were completely still in the middle of the road. I slowed down, pulling up behind them. It was an old semi-truck, one I didn't recognize from any of the usual companies. The paint was peeling, the metal rusted. There were no markings. I grabbed my radio again. "This is Eric from Ridgeway Transport. You okay up there?" Silence. I was about to step out when the truck's brake lights flickered on and off, like it was trying to signal something. Then the radio came back to life. A different voice this time. Weak. Desperate. "Help me." My blood ran cold. "Who is this? Where are you?" Silence again. Then, the truck in front of me suddenly reversed. I barely had time to react. I slammed the gear into reverse, my tires screeching against the icy road as I backed up just in time to avoid impact. My heart pounded as I watched the truck lurch forward again, its engine roaring to life. And that's when I saw someone in the passenger seat. A woman, her face pale, her eyes wide with terror, her hand pressed against the window like she was begging for help. Then, the truck vanished. No tire tracks, no sounds, just gone, swallowed by the storm. I sat there, shaking, my hands gripping the wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. Then the radio crackled again. A whisper. "You should have turned back." A shadow moved in my side mirror. I turned my head, my breath freezing in my throat. Someone was standing outside my truck. A dark figure, barely visible through the snow. I hit the gas. The tires skidded, the trailer fishtailed, but I didn't stop. I drove like hell was chasing me, not caring about the ice, not caring about the storm. For what felt like forever, I didn't look in the mirrors. When I finally did, there were handprints on my window. And in the distance, through the snow, the truck was back, following me. I don't remember much after that. I drove until I reached a small truck stop, skidding to a stop and jumping out, gasping for breath. The lot was empty. No other trucks. No headlights in the distance. But the handprints were still there. I went inside, shaking, and the clerk gave me a strange look. "Buddy, you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost." I didn't answer. I just ordered a coffee and sat in the corner, trying to convince myself that it was just the storm messing with me. But when I finally got the courage to go back outside, there was something scratched into the ice on my windshield. "Help me." I nearly dropped my coffee. I reached out, running my fingers over the words carved into the ice, and a sharp pain shot through my chest. Because the letters weren't just carved. They were written from the inside. I jumped into my truck, heart pounding, and slammed the door. I checked the passenger seat, the sleeping compartment, the mirrors. Nothing. But the cold inside the cabin never went away. And every time I drive through a snowstorm now, I hear it. A faint whisper over the radio. A voice I'll never forget. You should have turned back. I don't know if I was supposed to survive that night. It happened last winter, during a record-breaking snowstorm in North Dakota. I had been living in a remote cabin, about 30 miles from the nearest town. I moved out there for peace and quiet, thinking it would be the perfect place to disconnect from the world. I never expected the world to disconnect from me. The storm hit on a Thursday night, faster and harder than the forecasts predicted. By midnight, the wind was howling like a living thing, shaking the cabin walls. The snowfall was relentless, piling up against the windows so high that I couldn't see outside anymore. I still had power, but my internet and phone signal were gone. That didn't bother me at first. I had food, firewood, and enough supplies to last a few weeks if needed. But then around 2 a.m. I heard it, a knocking sound. I froze. It wasn't at the front door. It came from the window, a window that was completely covered in snow. I stared at the frost-covered glass, my heart hammering. It had to be the wind, I told myself. Maybe a branch from a tree. But deep down I knew. There were no trees near that side of the cabin. Then it came again. Slow, deliberate. I grabbed my flashlight and moved toward the window, my breath coming in short, panicked bursts. My mind raced through logical explanations, but none of them made sense. I hesitated, then reached out and wiped away a patch of frost with my sleeve. For a moment, I saw nothing but white. Then, a handprint appeared on the other side of the glass. I staggered backward, nearly dropping the flashlight. The print was small, like a child's, but I was miles away from anyone. And no one could have walked through that waist-deep snow to my cabin in the middle of a deadly blizzard. I wanted to believe it was my imagination, that I was seeing things. Then I heard it, a voice muffled by the wind. Let me in. I don't know how long I stood there, paralyzed with fear. The rational part of me knew it was impossible. There was no way anyone could have made it out here. They'd be dead from exposure. But the voice came again, closer this time. Please let me in. I did something I never should have done. I unlocked the door. Not to open it, just so I could hear better. The moment I did, the knocking stopped. And then, something scratched against the wood. Not with fingers. Not with nails. It sounded like something longer. Sharper. Like claws. I stepped back, my hands shaking. That's when I heard it moving. Not away from the door, but around the cabin. Circling. I could hear the crunch of snow, slow, deliberate footsteps, just beyond the walls. I turned off the flashlight, my instincts screaming at me to stay quiet. Then, a new sound. Tapping. On the other window. I forced myself to look. The frost was thicker now, but I could still see it. A face pressed against the glass. Not a child. Not a person. The features were blurred, distorted by the frost. But the eyes, they were too wide. Too black. I stumbled backward, my breathing ragged. It was watching me. Waiting. Then it smiled. A wide, unnatural grin that stretched too far across its face. And then, darkness. The power went out. I grabbed the fireplace poker and backed into the corner of the cabin, my eyes fixed on the door. My breath came out in cold puffs, the temperature inside already dropping without the heater. I tried to tell myself it was just the storm, that the power lines had gone down. Then, the doorknob turned. Once. Twice. Slow. Testing. I didn't breathe. The door was locked, but I had unlocked it earlier. I lunged forward and slammed the deadbolt shut, my heart pounding so hard I thought my ribs would crack. A long silence followed. Then I heard it whispering through the wood. You invited me in. I squeezed my eyes shut, pressing my back against the wall, gripping the poker so tightly my knuckles turned white. The whispers continued, growing softer, more distant. Then, silence. I don't know how long I sat there. Hours, maybe. When the sun finally rose, the storm had calmed, and I forced myself to open the door. There were no footprints in the snow, no handprints on the window, nothing to prove I hadn't lost my mind. But as I stepped outside, I saw something half buried in the snow near the trees. A torn jacket. Small, like a child's. I never stayed in that cabin again. But sometimes, in the dead of winter, when the wind howls outside my window, I swear I still hear it. I never should have taken that shortcut. I had driven through snowstorms before. Living in Minnesota my whole life, you get used to the unpredictability of winter. You plan ahead. You carry extra blankets, food, and a full tank of gas. But no amount of preparation could have saved me from what happened that night. It was late December, and I was on my way to visit my parents for the holidays. They lived about 5 hours north, in a quiet town surrounded by endless miles of forests and frozen lakes. I had taken this drive a dozen times before, but this time, the weather turned bad faster than expected. One moment, the road was clear. The next, it was like I had driven straight into another world, a swirling white abyss, where the sky and the road blended into one. I turned on my high beams, but they did nothing. The snow just reflected the light back at me, making visibility even worse. Then, my GPS lost signal. That should have been my cue to pull over and wait it out, but I was stubborn. I figured if I just kept going slow, I'd be fine. Then I saw a detour sign. It wasn't an official one, just a wooden sign stuck in the snow, with the words Route 17, open, scrawled in red paint. I hesitated. Route 17 was an old service road, one that cut through the dense forest, bypassing a good 30 miles of highway. It wasn't well maintained, and in bad weather, it was usually closed. But according to the sign, it was open. And in that moment, I made the worst mistake of my life. I took the turn. The road started off fine, narrow, winding, but drivable. The trees on either side were so tall and dense that they blocked out what little moonlight there was, making it feel like I was driving through a tunnel of shadows. About 10 minutes in, the storm got worse. The snow fell so thick and fast that I could barely see past the hood of my car. The road started to feel wrong, like it was narrowing, closing in. Then my headlights flickered. Just for a second. My stomach tightened. I checked my dashboard. Everything seemed normal. But that was the moment I started feeling like I wasn't alone. Like something was out there, watching me. I slowed down, my fingers gripping the wheel so tightly they ached. That's when I saw it. A figure in the road. A man, standing dead center, facing me. I slammed the brakes, my tires skidding on the ice. My car came to a stop just a few feet away from him, my heart pounding. He didn't move, didn't react, just stood there. I turned on my high beams and instantly regretted it. His face was wrong, not in a way I could explain. It was just off, like it didn't belong to him. His features were too sharp, too stretched, like his skin was pulled too tight over his bones. And his eyes were missing. Just empty sockets, blacker than the night around us. And then he smiled, a slow, deliberate grin that made my skin crawl. That's when I realized there were no footprints in the snow around him. He hadn't walked there. He had just appeared. I threw the car into reverse, but the tires spun uselessly. The road was too slick. The man took a step forward, then another. His movements weren't normal. They were jerky, unnatural, like a puppet being dragged by invisible strings. My headlights flickered again, and for a split second I saw them. More figures in the trees, lined up along the road, standing between the trunks, half hidden by the snow. Dozens of them, all watching, all smiling. I slammed my hand on the horn, the sound blasting through the silence. The man didn't flinch. He just kept walking toward my car, slow, deliberate, his bare feet sinking into the snow without a sound. Then, the radio turned on by itself. Static at first. Then beneath it, a faint voice, whispering, "You shouldn't be here." The man was inches away from my hood now, his head tilting as he reached one hand toward my windshield. I did the only thing I could. I hit the gas. The tires caught just enough grip, and my car lurched forward, passing straight through him. And for a horrifying second, I felt something cold brush against my skin, like fingertips running down my arm. Then he was gone. I didn't stop. I didn't look back. I just kept driving, my foot pressed to the floor, the trees blurring past me. But the road never ended. I drove for what felt like hours, but the forest just kept stretching on, the snow falling heavier, the shadows pressing closer. Then finally, I saw headlights ahead, A tow truck. I practically sobbed with relief, slowing down and rolling down my window as I pulled up beside it. The driver, an older man with tired eyes, leaned out. "What the hell are you doing out here?" he asked. "This road's been closed for years." I stared at him, my blood turning to ice. "But I saw the sign," I stammered. "The Dieter sign said it was open." His face went pale. "There ain't no sign out here," he muttered. "Hasn't been for a long time." I don't remember much after that. He helped me get my car turned around, and I followed him back to the main road. When I looked in my rearview mirror, the forest was gone. Just an endless stretch of untouched snow, and no sign of Route 17. I still don't know where I went that night, but sometimes on long drives, I see Dieter signs out of the corner of my eye, handwritten, pointing down roads that shouldn't exist. And I keep driving, because I know now, some roads don't lead anywhere. Some roads only take